understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is podcast time, and Ireland could potentially, in 2025, John, Ireland could go from having President Michael D. Higgins, friend of Fidel Castro, friend of Daniel Ortega, friend of the liberation movement in Latin America, a literate guy, a poet, an academic, a thinker, to Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor has just announced, I know you find this difficult, has just announced that he is going to run for president in 2025. Or as he said in his tweet, which has been seen by 9.8 million people, 2025 ...
Because he represents the Irish people.
He represents the Irish people.
He epitomizes the Irish man, the typical Irish man.
All I'm just saying is, who knows what might happen?
Yeah.
Because politics has been bizarre. And McGregor has thrown his hat in the ring.
And I saw that tweet with her. And I also saw that two of the responses was one from Elon Musk and the other one from Andrew Tate. Two upstanding gentlemen.
Two lads you would love to go for a pint with. Yeah. Not. So but my point is that what is happening in the world politically is so bizarre. You would have laughed your Swiss roll off had I said to you in 2011, Donald Trump will be president.
Yeah.
These things can happen. Particularly if something happens, you get a strange turn of events. I mean... But
it's like our friend in Ukraine, from a stand-up comedian... Zelensky to president.
Yeah, so all these can happen. And, John, it could be you.
Do you know what, Mac? It might be me.
I think so. I think you should run under your an unreconstructed Bolshevik banner. You would be nationalising, collectivising...
I'm going to whip out my beret.
Exactly. Collectivising small farms, nationalising everything, and putting exchange controls on, and basically squeezing the rich.
I'm going to nationalise O'Brien's wines. That's what I'm going to do.
Speaking of which, I believe you've just come back from France, laden down with wine.
I wasn't laden down with as much as I wanted to be laden down by, but I did bring back a couple of boxes of this Chardonnay.
Ooh.
It was £3 each, but it's really lovely. And it's called Chardonnay.
That will be
straight and to the point.
That'll be served in the Black Forge before you know it. Anyway, let us get on with the podcast. We're going to be talking about something we've spoken about the last couple of weeks: infrastructure, housing, all that sort of stuff, with Sean Keys, who I'll tell you about in 2 seconds. But you've got something to...
Yeah, and just on that, actually, I just want to give a quick shout out to Kieran McBride, because do you remember we were doing that episode talking about the railway being built by the Chinese in Serbia? Well, our friend Kieran was listening to that podcast while standing on the platform.
In Serbia?
In Serbia, in Novi Sad. He was just getting on the train to go to Belgrade. So he took a couple of pictures. And the train looks really slick. It's really good.
And reach of the podcast, John. Into central Serbia, parts of the world we've never even visited.
Yeah. One of the pictures as well was of a billboard explaining the whole project with the China railways all over it. Really interesting.
This is the new world. This is the Belt and Road, John. The Belt and Road.
Yeah.
If Ireland was closer to Asia, we might have a chance of getting the Chinese...
Belt and Road and bridge.
And bridge, exactly. A big, long bridge. Anyway, let's talk about exactly this, because this is a problem that bedevils all English-speaking countries, which is the inability to build infrastructure at a time when the economies require it. Why? Because English-speaking countries, it's this strange dilemma. English-speaking countries have economies that grow quicker than continental economies. But because we can't create infrastructure at the same pace as the continentals, we hit bottlenecks very, very quickly. We hit inflation very, very quickly. We hit queues very, very quickly. We hit delays very, very quickly. And you have this bizarre thing that basically continental countries are set up to absorb more immigrants than we are, and are set up to actually absorb bigger demand. But they don't, because the economies don't work as well. Our economies work better in terms of GDP and income and all that sort of stuff, but we have a problem with infrastructure. And that is the root of the problem. And we're going to basically take the position of the put upon English-speaking part of the world. So it's ourselves, the Brits, the Yanks, the Canadians, the Aussies, and the Kiwis,
Yeah.
right? It's us against the world in terms of our inefficiency against all the Latin countries, which are much better at doing that.
But it's not just about infrastructure.
No, it's about progress, this idea of progress. So one of the notions against progress is that there are manifest constraints all the time. There aren't enough resources, there are problems with the economy, etc. That actually, in fact, economics is all about making choices under constraint resources. There is a world in which you can imagine very few constraints, where there is abundance rather than constraints. And that's what we're going to talk about. But we're going to talk to Sean Keyes, who's just set up a think tank called progressireland.org. And it's all about the possibilities of this country. But it's not just this country, it's all the English-speaking countries. So let us go and talk to Sean.
Just before we do, I just want to let the listener know that if you hear the odd beep in the background, we're down here in the basement, and I think it's one of the smoke alarms, and I can't find it. And
John has spent, it's quite funny, he spent the last hour looking for a beeping smoke alarm. And the smoke alarm that we have, I can look at it now, see it. It has the wires taken off. It looks like a robbed car stereo.
I've just dismantled that.
Exactly.
It's still beeping.
And by the way, John, what are we doing next week?
We are going away on a little trip around the country.
Get your tickets. We are in Dublin on Monday night in Vicar Street. We are in Limerick on Wednesday. We are in Galway on Thursday. And the following Monday, we are in Cork, ending appropriately in the real capital. And that's all at davidmcwilliams.ie. We're going to be talking about the book, but we're also going to be talking about all other issues pertaining, as I'd say, to the economy. So if you haven't got your tickets, grab them now. And if you have some questions you want to ask us, by all means, get them ready. So it's Dublin, Limerick, Galway, Cork, in that order. davidmcwilliams.ie/podcasts. We'll see you next week. Now, back to talk to Sean. Now, last November in Kettler's, a pub restaurant in Kilkenny, on a Sunday, slightly hungover, feeling a little bit worse for wear after a big Kilkenomics night, which had, as it always does on a Saturday night, a sort of a party element. And the party was in the Home Rule Club. If you're ever down in Kilkenny, one of the most interesting buildings in the city is the Home Rule Club, as you will gather from the name, founded by members of the Home Rule Party in the 1870s and 1880s. Now, the following morning, I meet our next guest, Sean Keyes, and he is sitting in Kettler's, plotting and planning and devising what has now come to light and come to life as progressireland.org. I'm delighted to say that I witnessed the embryonic stage of this movement, and I think it will be a movement. Sean, first of all, congratulations on the website. Congratulations on the initiative. Tell us all about it, and it's great to see you again.
Thank you, David. Great to see you too. So Progress Ireland is a think tank. That means that we research and we promote big, useful ideas that we think the country can benefit from. We have a tagline, and the tagline is ideas to unlock Ireland's potential.
Okay, now explain that to me.
All right, well, so we think Ireland has even more potential than other places. I mean, everywhere has got potential, but we think Ireland's got particularly abundant potential. And we think that the bottleneck to actually realizing it is ideas and policy ideas, and that's the part that we want to play.
Okay, so why, first of all, we're going to step back because we have a lot of British listeners and they too are sitting in the UK. They're looking at their infrastructure, their housing, and they're thinking, I feel the same way. The UK has potential, but those potential, we have a lot of American listeners, Canadian listeners, basically in the English-speaking world. This will resonate with a lot of people. Tell me, A, why you think Ireland's got a little bit more potential than everywhere else, and B, what can be done about it?
Okay, so to make the case for Ireland's potential, 3 arguments. 1, I think Ireland has things that other places just don't have. So we've got, by European standards, a very strong economy. We've got very strong communities, and not just at the level of like the GAA club, but like the national community, national politics, very reasonable, respectful, moderate. And we've got, the environment is a plus. Second reason is that we are underperforming. And, that's good, right? Because from a potential
There's
point
somewhere
of
to
view,
go.
yeah, you've got more potential energy. You're at the top of the hill. You'd rather be overperforming than underperforming. And by that, I mean, if you look at the statistics, you know this well, David, Ireland's economic statistics are exceptionally strong. Incomes are extremely high. The national balance sheet is strong. Household balance sheets are strong. It should feel like, a rich part of Germany or Switzerland or somewhere, but it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by underachieving in some ways. And the third reason why I think Ireland's got a lot of potential is to do with timing. So if you look Ireland's economic history, basically 200 years, not much happens. And during that time, all these other countries around Europe are, modernizing, urbanizing. They're figuring out all these hard problems, moving people from the country to the city and building rail lines and industries and all that complexity. They're building it and figuring it out, trial and error. And in the meantime, in Ireland, there's very little happening. Cattle exports, people exports. But now it's Ireland's turn to have this population boom, to modernize and to urbanize. And we have an opportunity to look at our peers who have spent, 100 years figuring out all these problems through trial and error. We don't have to learn through trial and error. We can observe, okay, there's a lesson that we can take from there. Let's be open to it. Let's take it in. I said it's a bit like, I don't know if people are interested in poker. It's a bit like you're playing poker. If you're on the button in poker, you're the last person to act. You watch what everyone else at the table does, and then you make your decision. And having that extra information is really valuable, and you make more money in that position. So in poker terms, Ireland's on the button.
Okay, so you've got three reasons as to why we have got this little island, which is becoming more populated by the day. It is, as you say, very stable politically. If we don't incorporate Northern Ireland into the next 50 years, it'll remain more and more stable, I suspect, in comparison to our peers. You have, as you said, last mover advantage, which is kind of nice. I quite like that. Basically, Paddy last is going to be okay because you can look around the world and see. And the third one is, and this I think everybody knows when they go traveling, is that we go to countries with similar levels of income per head, wealth, etc., and they look as if they're living in the 22nd century, and we look as if we're living in the 19th century when it comes to trains and infrastructures and tunnels and all that sort of thing. I was in Italy on the ill-fated football trip, John. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
But what I was really intrigued about Italy...
You missed that goal.
I know. I missed two sitters, right? But the interesting thing about Italy is a long strip of land with a massive mountain in the middle of it, in effect, going all the way down. So the Italian infrastructure is just tunnel after tunnel after tunnel after tunnel. It's amazing. And this was built in an economy that has been allegedly spluttering for the last 40 years. And yet they've made commitments to this sort of thing. So explain to me one thing, Sean. Why are the English-speaking countries lagging behind the continental countries in this regard?
So, okay, we're getting into the particular question of infrastructure. So infrastructure is one of the three areas that we look at. Infrastructure projects, they're big and messy and complex. And it can be hard to compare them and tease out cause and effect because, there aren't that many of them. Each one is different. Who's to say why one went well and badly? Some new data is sort of shed some light on this question. And multiple researchers have looked at the question of, like you said, tunneled metro systems. And they created a giant database, all the tunnel metro systems for the 20th century, that were created in the 20th century, over 900 in one study and over 300 in another one. And with that data, you can start to tease out cause and effect. You can start to see what things cost per kilometer and what the other inputs are. And the top line takeaway is when you do that exercise, you see, oh my God, European countries are building these things at an average of about a quarter of the cost of English-speaking countries.
That's huge.
So, Paris just completed a metro extension. New York is in the middle of completing a metro extension. The New York one is going to cost 13 times the price.
Of the French one?
Of the Parisian one, yeah. And I just compared them because they're both, got big, complex cities. And like Paris isn't even noted for the efficiency of its metro construction. It's just another European country. So that's just the headline. It's like, okay, we see this big disparity, English speaking, not English speaking, and then you're asking, okay, so what's going on here? The people who look at this work say, it's okay, obviously they're complex, what's going on, but the one thing that they all point to is this question of state capacity and control, and that European countries tend to employ technical experts in-house to manage their projects. And I've been thinking about this all year long. I talked to you about this last year, and I've been kind of putting a finer point on it. And, every country, whether you're European or English speaking, like they all outsource stuff. The government can't do everything.
Yeah.
And it's not right. It shouldn't do everything.
Yeah.
So you rely on
we
different
outsource
people.
bike sheds here, but that's that's just for the non-Irish listeners. The Irish government commissioned a bike shed. I jest you not. A bike shed for, I think, a dozen bikes.
It was 18, I think.
18 bikes. And the bike shed came in at a cost of 380,000 euros, to which many people thought, here.
And they still get wet in the rain.
But anyway, the point is, this is indicative of what many people, not just in Ireland, but in the English-speaking world, see as extraordinarily ridiculous expense for basic
Yes.
infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's not an Irish problem. It's not even an English problem. It's a whole Anglosphere thing.
Why is that, Sean? Explain to me. Why is the Anglosphere so expensive?
So it boils down to two words, which are control and complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So the control is like the defined feature of ownership is control. If you own a project, then therefore you control it. Governments in all these places we're talking about, from English speaking and European, the government always owns the project because they are funding it. So it's their project. So the control will always sit with them. It cannot by definition be delegated. So how do they exercise their control? Do you exercise it via these like experienced project managers and procurement people and tunneling experts? Or do you exercise it via your generalist civil servants and all the processes around it, the civil service? And so if you are an English-speaking country and you require a metro because you've got a growing population and all the things you need metros for, and you've got the money, but you don't have those technical staff on the books, what are you going to do? You're like, well, I guess we'll try it anyway. We'll bring in some consultants and we'll figure it out between us. But it just goes back to that thing of control. Like you can bring in as many consultants as you want, but the control will always sit with you.
And the bill will always be paid by you.
And the bill will always be paid by you. And when it comes to complex projects, control matters even more because there's lots of decisions that need to be made on the hoof. It's not a thing where you can just, like an IKEA flat pack, you just roll it out. The control function actually needs to be really good because they're constantly involved in the project. So that's how I see it. And so going back to the Italians, they're experts at it. They've built up the muscle in their government over many years, and now it's even an export industry for Italian governments where they will sell their expertise and how to build metros. They operate the metro in Copenhagen.
Do they? So they've already gone and outsourced and built metros and operate them for the Danes in Copenhagen with Italian expertise.
And it's the Italian government. So it's like the government is acting like an exporter, an exporting private company.
So in the case of Ireland or Britain, for example, or Canada, Australia, New Zealand, I mean, what kind of terrifies me is I saw that New Zealand is the most expensive place to build a metro in the world, and we've just employed a New Zealander to actually build our metro.
We have, and
can you? I mean, I don't know the geezer. He might be lovely. We might go for 6 pints with him. Who knows? But it doesn't fill me with great confidence that the place that has the most expensive metros per kilometre in the world, the geezer has now been employed to look after our metro. Like, why didn't we employ an Italian fella?
What I like though is that we're paying him. We're paying 550,000 for him. Like that was obviously a big internal argument in Deeper and the Department of Transport, and the principle has been, one that's like, what, like this is a mega project, could cost as much as 23 billion. Let's not be penny wise pound foolish here, and let's pay the right people. Now you need him, but you probably need another 14 more people like him to assist him at the heart of the project. So that's where we are. We're trying to, with Metrolink, we need to decide what path we're going to go down. Are we going to empower those experts, or will it be kind of a halfway house?
But can I ask you just one question? I'm going to leave infrastructure because, as John noted, we've done a lot of infrastructure, but it is absolutely crucial to the development of all economies. Can I ask you, is it possible simply to cut and paste what I would call Napoleonic legal system adjacent project into a common law legal system?
Mm.
Because you know the way in Ireland you can object to this and that and the other, and it doesn't seem to be the case in France or Italy or Spain.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'm here focusing on the expertise of a couple of people as though that's the only thing that matters. It very much isn't. I mean, like on our metro system, I'd forgotten this fact. So the metro system as planned is going to go from Swords to Charlemont, and then there's a 500-meter gap in the middle, and then the Lewis, which is compatible with being a metro system, is going to go down south into the Dublin Mountains. So we have this 500-meter gap in the middle of our metro system is because of our planning systems, and that costs us.
Hold on a second. Wait a second. Sorry. Wait. Just I'm gonna stop you there. Are you telling me yet again that the existing transport system will not link up with the new metro system?
Oh yeah, I mean the Lewis line that runs south is perfectly compatible with being a high capacity metro system, but it's not going. We're going to have two separate ones.
Why?
Because there was a big argument, and the burghers of Ranelagh won the argument, and they decided that it wasn't worth the hassle and the construction.
I mean, John, we covered a lot of things, so we can't be across everything. But I assumed after the fiasco of the Lewis lines not joining up, do you remember?
Yeah.
And at least we would have a continuous line. So you're saying that people will...
common sense should win out, you would think.
Why in God's name are we worried about what people in Ranelagh think? Why are people in Ranelagh allowed to impede what is a national project?
Yes, this is the English-speaking countries, as I said, they've got this thing about state capacity in common, but they've got something else in common, which is, especially in the UK and Ireland, their planning systems and common law. Common law, which is the system we use in English-speaking countries, can be weaponized more readily than Napoleonic law, the civil law, which is what you find in Europe. And so, like the places, the real like black belt metro builders, they've got that stuff I've been talking about. Like they've got the experts, but they've also got, like the city of Madrid has it's like this integrated unit. It raises its own taxes. It sets its own planning law, and it employs its own people. So it's all like one big vertically integrated machine that wants a metro, and they can all work together. Whereas in our world, you've got maybe the national government funding the metro. You're relying on then the city or on board Planola to do the planning, and you might not have the capacity to do it. So yeah, planning is another matter altogether. I think it's a big tax on all of our infrastructure, and it's always going to be a tax until we figure it out.
And the few profit over the many.
I think we're hopefully edging our way to a better system, but I think the key to really good planning systems is just like you have your arguments up front. So it's not that local stakeholders get railroaded and they don't have a right to be heard. But
yes.
You say up front, say, okay, guys, like in this neighborhood, what would be reasonable? And you get all the politicians together. You say, all right, what if we were allowed to build a street this wide or a house this wide or whatever it might be? And then like once that is thrashed out, you get a specific set of rules and you sign them off, and then that is it. And people know what they can do, they can build. And in our part of the world, we have the arguments as we go.
And then of course you have at the end of the day, people say, well, I didn't agree to that, so I'm going to go to the courts and I'm going to exercise my democratic right as a citizen to oppose, impede, and retard a project. Okay, we've done infrastructure. Let's talk about the innovation side of your program, because you have housing, infrastructure, innovation. Let's talk about innovation, because housing, again, is a broadly similar set of impediments to what we're talking about in infrastructure. So let's talk about innovation, the science of science, as you call it.
So in Ireland, innovation policy isn't really at the top of our agenda. I think it's because the Americans are so good at it. We're just like, leave it to them. They're over it for us. But we think that's very unwise. One reason is, there was about 2 years ago, there was a project among certain senators to change the tax law, which would have completely pulled the rug out from under the Irish economy. They failed at that time, but they may not continue to fail forever.
What was that law again? What was that initiative again?
It's just the way taxes in So in the US, they allow their multinational subsidiaries to be taxed at the local rate rather than back at the federal rate in the US. So it was kind of set up in the 1990s to encourage American firms to conquer the world, which they did. But if it were changed so that Irish profits have to be taxed at the American level, at the American rate, then our advantage would disappear and our economy would be in trouble. But anyway, you don't have to assume that's going to happen. But there's also, we're talking about innovation. It's a very dynamic sector, technology, pharmaceuticals. It's like companies have a faster life cycle there than other industries. They live and die quickly. And we've managed to win a couple of generations of investment. And we started off with Gateway and Dell and Compaq and those people. And then we got the next wave and we won the Googles and the Facebooks as well. But, there's no guarantee basically that we're going to keep winning successive waves. So I think it's worth taking innovation seriously as a project. Okay, so that's just making the case for it. So while all that's happening, we're setting up this thing, Tie to Éireann Research Ireland, which is a new body to how we're going to fund science. And while that's happening, out in the US, particularly, is kind of the maturation of a set of ideas about what the best way is for governments to actually fund science and ideas. The system that we have for funding science and ideas it's sort of a holdover, a relic from the 50s. And it's very kind of crude and industrial. And it's sort of like, okay, the government will shove some money into it. There will be grants. The scientists will apply for the grants. The grants will be very onerous. And the government will decide what the scientists are going to be researching as well. And so what you end up with is, like, when you survey scientists, they spend like 40% of their time on that
doing the bureaucracy
piece, doing the bureaucracy. Yeah. And also the other kind of hidden cost is that the direction of the work is chosen by the bureaucracy rather than the scientists. And so these new ideas I'm talking about, meta science, is like, the high level idea of meta science is like, let's be rigorous and scientific and run experiments on how we actually organize and fund science. So let's like just tinker around and see what works. And there's a bunch of different hypotheses you might try about how to get more output from your science. But like the first hypothesis they're testing is, well, what if we empower the actual expert scientists to decide what to work on and kind of just trust them a bit more, give them a bit more leeway and see what comes of that. And the early results are good. And so you've got Patrick Collison has helped fund a research institute on these sort of principles in the US. The American federal scientific bureaucracy is like moving towards using these meta science principles in the UK.
So what you're saying is that basically we have a top-down system, which is very old-fashioned, and it also is suggesting that there's a big brainy person in the department of this, that, and the other who knows what's going on, right? What you're saying is hold that and do the opposite. Have a bottom-up structure. So have a pool of cash that scientists can avail of to pay themselves first, but also to pay for their research laboratories, and the science of science is expensive. So give them the money, don't ask any questions, allow them to do their own stuff, and they will come up with, it's almost like crowdsourcing, and it's kind of intellectual crowdsourcing. They will come up with their own stuff, and this is the way in which science progresses and has always progressed, by individuals on their tods or in small teams saying, actually, I don't think that's the way the world works. It works this way. And you can't preordain this or you can't predetermine this because it is in and of itself an organic idea.
Okay, I don't disagree with anything you said, but before any civil servants listening to this have a heart attack, what I'm suggesting is much less risky than you're saying, because I'm saying like the idea that we could fund scientists more freely is just a hypothesis, and it's one that you could test at a low cost. So the idea of implementing meta science at Research Ireland isn't like, let's just like give this a lash and see what happens. It's just like, let's be rigorous and open to experimentation and open to ideas, and like, let's test ideas and see what works. And if we did that, we might find that we'd get more of what we want for our budget. We'd get more, IP and ideas and exports and jobs,
almost
and
like
all
the
that
Stephen
good stuff.
Kenny experiment on football, but without a proper opposition against you. Stephen Kenny, all will look good on paper, But Theo, it didn't work.
Well, I'd rather Pep Guardiola maybe. I mean, he was scientific.
A little bit of ticky-tacky.
We'll take
you
him.
can definitely
Can I
have
him
Pep.
instead?
I was actually
Yeah.
reading about the DNA of Pep and Johan Cruyff and all sorts of things the other day. It was fascinating, but that takes us down
That's another podcast, Mac.
a different tributary, John, a different tributary. Okay, so let's go back. The aim of progressireland.org is to engage Irish society and communities in discussions, in ideas, almost a sort of way of saying empower ourselves, but also to put pressure on those who make decisions to make the right decisions.
That's right, yeah. And it's part of it is about, as I said, well, maybe I didn't say this, part of it is about us being outward looking, connecting Ireland up to useful ideas from overseas. That's a big part of what we do. And that's sort of top down, you're looking at what has worked and trying to tailor it for Ireland. But another thing that we do, we are very open to is, I think everybody is very close to certain problems and in their own lives, and they understand them very well. And we've gotten a lot of value from talking to people who are very close to things like that. And we can on our website, we have an area where you can submit ideas, and there's we try to be quite rigorous about helping shape the ideas that we receive in so that we can do something with them. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do. I think in terms of the solutions that we're proposing, superficially, they might seem like kind of a grab bag, like, oh, you're just total centrists with no particular ideology. Which is a bit like centrism is inherently kind of boring and lame, really, isn't it?
You're talking to the two most centrist of centrist dads here, John and I.
But what we're saying is so some of our stuff is about the state needs to do more. Some of it is about the state needs to get out of its own way. But there is a through line there. They're not just sort of random ideas that we think are kind of interesting. And the through line is it's about the supply side of the economy and making the supply side of the economy work for people. So the idea of supply side economics, in the past, it was sort of about get the government off businesses' back and let them generate wealth, and then that will make everybody richer. That was the core kind of idea behind supply side economics. And what we're saying is, if you look at all the problems the government is trying to solve, the kind of standard operating principles is that there'll be an argument over whether to solve it. And if, depending on the argument, the government will decide to fund it. So if they want to solve a problem, they'll fund the problem, and they might subsidize something or whatever. They direct resources.
That was the general way of which people did business, countries did business.
That's right. And it worked in Ireland as everywhere else. And in Ireland, here we are, we've had plenty of money, more or less for 30 years. The problems that are amenable to being solved with funding have largely been solved. And the ones that we're left with are the ones that aren't amenable to being solved with money, and there's a different bottleneck.
Interesting.
So what we're trying to break this cycle of subsidy and inflation, which never actually resolves the underlying problem, and get in and unlock the underlying supply of the thing that would solve the problem. So whether it's housing, it's basically about more houses, infrastructure, what's stopping us from building infrastructure more cheaply, innovation, how can we get more out of our innovation funding? But it's just this idea of let's unlock the supply side of the economy so that we can actually get the things that we want.
So what you're saying is there is a world of abundance out there. So the idea is, the great thing about economics always said, economics is the science of making choices under constraints, right? That's one of the great things if you think about economics. And I remember when I learned that, first of all, I said, would you speak English, please? What do you actually mean by that? But the idea was that basically there's a finite amount of stuff out there. You got to make a few choices. You got to figure things out. And that's the core of microeconomics, the absolute core. What you're saying is, no, actually, the world is potentially abundant in all sorts of stuff that we thought were constrained. And we just have to get out of our own way, in effect.
Yes. And I think the best single example of this is the energy policy of the state of Texas. I mean, Texans, right? Not hippies, not known for being hippies or terribly liberal.
John is the Sue Ellen of podcasting over here.
With my Chardonnay.
With your Chardonnay. Under the umbrella beside the pool in South Fork. Waiting for JR.
In only about 4 or 5 years, Texas has gone from nowhere to leading the US by a country mile in renewables. And it's surpassed California, and at the trajectory that they're on, California will never catch up to it.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And the point is that the reason Texas has been able to incredibly quickly kind of decarbonize its economy is because they make it very straightforward and easy to build wind power and solar power. And where Californians are all in favor of renewables in principle and they will subsidize it, but they tie the industry up in knots and make it very difficult to actually build the things you need. So that's kind of what we're getting at. Like, it's not about what we want. It's about, like, can you actually build it? How can we lift the impediments that are stopping us from building what we need?
That's amazing, because obviously, again, I mean, I am still stuck with an image of Texas, which is very much a gas guzzling vista of oil, basically oil rigs pumping out oil and burning big flames of oil into the sky. And we're saying is that's very 1970s, David. They've actually changed completely, and they've done it.
Well, they just have a culture there that it's easy to build, and so when the numbers add up, things get built.
Sean, this is fascinating stuff. The website is progressireland.org. We will be hearing more of you because it is refreshing. I really mean it. It's refreshing to have alternative, not just voices, but alternative action. Because one thing is clear, not just here, but in Britain, in America, in Canada, all these down in Australia, if we don't get the supply side in its proper description of what it is working, we will become mired in inflation. And that inflation will kick into living standards, and those living standards will kick people into voting for all sorts of variety of characters who are going to say, here's a quick fix. So there's a direct join the dot idea between what you're talking about and inflation value for money and how far your euro or your dollar or your whatever goes in terms of living, in terms of heating your house, in terms of paying your rent, all that stuff. So we will see you. We might even see you in Kettler's in Kilkenny.
Yeah, I remember I tempted you down by saying, David, come down for breakfast with me. I've got a secret to tell you about, but I can't tell you now. And you had to come then.
And of course, we blathered it out over here. but we actually sat in it for a year, which is quite impressive. It's very unlike me, actually. Great stuff, Sean.
All
Listen,
right.
we'll talk to you again.
Thank you,
Wonderful
David.
stuff.
It was a pleasure.
I love the way Sean called the Italians the black belt in building and planning.
Exactly.
And this whole idea of the government of Italy exporting its expertise to Denmark and all the rest. I remember I was in Norway a few years ago and talking about tunneling. They had, because they've got so many bloody mountains, they have tunnels through them all, but they're, you go through a mile-long tunnel or 2 mile-long tunnel. But just outside Tromsø, there was a tunnel, and in the middle of the tunnel, there was a massive roundabout with
other tunnels.
All the tunnels going off in lots of different directions. And then in the middle of the town, the car park, the main car park in the city was underground in the middle of a mountain.
It can be done.
Serious engineering.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the dilemma for all English-speaking countries is either we never acquired the talent or we let the talent go. Certainly that happened in the UK, because the Brits were very, very good at engineering. I mean, that's what they did. I mean, they were, Brunel, they were building bridges, they were building all sorts of things. Victorian Britain was a building Britain, and they have abandoned all that. And again, the United States, the same thing is the private sector will do it, et cetera, outsource. What is fascinating, I think we leave it here, is the sense of possibility. That people like Sean are saying, you know what, it doesn't have to be like this. We can, as you've identified, have a roundabout of tunnels all over the place, But the point is, if we don't do this, then the economy will seize up. And then all these gains we've made over the last 20 years will simply evaporate in inflation. And that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
So if we don't sort this out, it will sort us out in the guise of high prices.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about what he opened up there was saying that Ireland is underperforming. Like, on one hand, we're overperforming with our multinationals, and we've overperformed, as you've said many times, in the last 20, 30 years. We've grown faster than anybody else. So the underperformance part, though, is more to do with the homegrown domestic businesses.
It's very, very interesting. You should mention the multinationals. The multinationals are a textbook case of outsourcing stuff you can't do to somebody else.
Yeah.
That's what they are.
Okay.
Do the same thing for tunneling, for infrastructure. Exactly the same thing. You don't have to build the stuff yourself. Outsources, but have competent managers in Ireland who who represent the taxpayer.
Yeah.
And once you do that, you can almost do anything. We'll talk to you next week.